The Trump and Iran agreement, the memorandum of understanding. Our predictions came true. This is the English live podcast of Management of Reality on the 18th of June, 2026. And we are not celebrating that the universe is like this. We are not. We cannot. How could we? But we are celebrating that once again, our model predicted the future. Because from the scientific point of view, regardless of what the universe is, you want to know exactly what it is so that you can navigate the universe better. Don't kill the messenger. If the model works, use it. Use it to defend the West. And what are we seeing here? We are seeing that pretty much everything that we said came true. So first I'm going to walk you through the consequences of Donald Trump's latest diplomacy so that you can see that his diplomacy matches. Well, I mean, I'll be telling you what's been happening, and then you can compare that to what I predicted, because we have a little video where it's like a potpourri. We show you the various predictions that I made in different channels before the war and also during the war. And I'll show you that after we go through the evidence of what has been happening. Okay, then you can compare the predictions to the outcome, and that'll allow you to decide whether you think the model is doing well, as I think. And following that, I will explain some of the important evidence with which this model was put together so that you understand that this is not done in a vacuum. The model is put together by doing historical research on the stable policy strategy of the people who run the world. And once you can see the patterns in what they're doing, you can infer what their intentions are, their long-term goals, their medium-term goals, and so forth. And that allows you to make qualitative predictions about the kind of outcome that they want to see. And this, to a certain extent, allows you to anticipate the future, which is what we're doing. And if you can do this, you can also defend yourself, okay? The point of understanding the world is for us to defend ourselves. So let's begin with a quick look at what has been going on. All right. So I'm going to show you some headlines from the various media. And I will begin with the headlines that I was showing you last week, okay? So last week, we were talking about Hezbollah because I published an article on the result of the war in Lebanon. So I was showing people the various headlines reported on the question of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the first one I show you here, Iran gets Trump to rescue Hezbollah. By threatening talks, the regime gets the US to tie Israel's hands. This is a very dramatic headline. Now notice, of course, I don't agree with the interpretation of the Wall Street Journal where Iran is supposedly manipulating Trump, right? I don't think a fifth-rate power manipulates the most powerful people to have existed on planet Earth in all of its history. I don't think that makes any sense. I think it's way more likely that Trump is using the Iranian ayatollahs, right? So I don't agree with the Wall Street Journal's interpretation of the relationship. But notice that the Wall Street Journal cannot help but describe the alignment precisely as I describe it. So I claim that Donald Trump, like presidents before him, like US presidents before him, is aligned with the Iranian ayatollahs and with Hezbollah to destroy the state of Israel. That's what I claim. And here, the headline is saying that Trump is aligned with Iran to rescue Hezbollah and to tie Israel's hands. They're really very close to my claims. The difference is becoming almost academic, right? So they're claiming that Iran supposedly is the boss. Well, that's nonsense. But the alignment, they are not disputing. Trump is working to get Iran and Hezbollah what they want and is tying Israel's hands. That's how they reported this. Axios says Trump tells Axios he will ask Netanyahu not to strike back at Iran. Okay, so what was going on, what explains both headlines, right? Why did Hezbollah need to be rescued? Oh, because Hezbollah started firing on the Israeli Defense Forces, and Israel fired back and took territory and basically kicked Hezbollah's ass, right? So Hezbollah was going to be destroyed. The threat now was that Israel was going to completely wipe out Hezbollah. So they needed rescuing. Who came to the rescue? Trump, right? And when Iran sent some missiles against the civilian population of Israel, because that's what they always do, Trump tells Netanyahu not to strike back. So Israel is under attack, and Trump doesn't allow Israel to reply to the attack. This is the best ally of Israel, right? So both Hezbollah and Iran are attacking Israel, and Trump is rescuing Hezbollah and protecting Iran. New York Post, Trump insists Israel's Netanyahu won't have any choice in accepting Iran peace deal after fresh strikes. I call the shots. And indeed, that's what happened. The accord, the memorandum of understanding was negotiated without the participation of Israel. That should remind you of the Munich Agreement in World War II, if you know anything about World War II, because Neville Chamberlain, as Prime Minister of the British Empire, negotiated Czechoslovakia's surrender to Germany without the participation of Czechoslovakia in the negotiations. This was a dramatic thing because Czechoslovakia would have destroyed Germany if Germany had insisted in attacking Czechoslovakia. So for Germany to take Czechoslovakia, they needed Chamberlain to do this. Hitler needed Chamberlain to do this diplomacy to get Czechoslovakia for free, because the Czechoslovaks in the Sudetenland, they had constructed the most formidable fortifications in the world, comparable only to the Maginot Line on the Franco-German border. Okay, tremendous. You can still visit these fortifications today because there's no way to remove them. It's the most tremendous thing you've ever seen. And if Hitler's armies had tried to surpass those fortifications, they would have destroyed themselves. Maybe they would have won, but they wouldn't have been able to conquer a second country. So Nazism would have been finished, right? And Chamberlain saved the Nazis. Hitler was already giving the order for attacking Czechoslovakia, and at the last minute, Chamberlain saved him and forced Czechoslovakia to surrender to Hitler and gave Hitler Czechoslovakia for free. And, well, this is what's happening here. Donald Trump is saving the ayatollahs from destruction. That's what the nuclear deal is about. That's what signing a memorandum of understanding is about. If the ayatollahs sign, they get to live, they get to stay in power. That's the entire point of this diplomacy. And Trump tells Netanyahu, you cannot participate in the negotiations. And indeed, that's what happened. The memorandum of understanding was negotiated without Israel. Israel's surrender was negotiated without Israel's participation. This is a new Munich. And you will see soon why I'm making this comparison, because what happened in World War II has a lot to do with how this model, the management of reality model, has been constructed. This is all still from last week. Again, the New York Post. Trump scolds Netanyahu in testy phone call. You could be left alone against Iran very soon. What was the subject of the testy disagreement? That Netanyahu insists in fighting back against Iran and Hezbollah, at least in this particular instance. That's what the disagreement was about. And Trump was furious that Israel should defend itself when under attack from genocidal jihadis who want to kill every last living man, woman, and Jewish child in Israel. Oh, this was very upsetting to Trump. Okay, so he practically jumped out of his seat and yelled at Netanyahu and told him that he could, if he didn't behave, Trump could leave him fighting alone against Iran, which of course would be a very good thing, because then in that circumstance, Trump would lose control over Israeli foreign policy, and Israel might then win at least one of its wars. The New York Post again says, U.S.-Iran peace deal demands Israel withdraw from Lebanon to respect territorial integrity. So now this is updated to the present moment. This is no longer last week. This is now the memorandum of understanding. Okay, it's remarkable, right? In order to say this kind of stuff, you have to say magical words. You have to make up stuff like Lebanon. The hell is Lebanon? Lebanon doesn't exist. What they call Lebanon is a Hezbollah terror state. For a long time, Hezbollah has been the real lord of Lebanon. What are they talking about, Lebanon? Respect the territorial integrity of Lebanon? That means nothing. I'll tell you what it means. Respecting the territorial integrity of Lebanon means letting Hezbollah survive, to fight another day, to try again to exterminate the Israeli Jewish population. That's what it means. These are euphemisms, so that you won't understand what they're doing. Times of Israel. Again, this is the memorandum of understanding. I'm going to give these to you more or less in order from the past week. Senior Israeli officials say the memorandum of understanding endangers Israel's security, nuclear and other key issues unresolved, U.S. giving up military leverage. Indeed, this memorandum of understanding is giving Iran everything it wants, even though Iran was losing the war. The only model that makes sense of this is that the U.S. president is pro-jihadi. Otherwise, if you're winning a war against the jihadis you dislike and who say that they want to destroy the United States and they want to destroy the West and they want to destroy your best ally, Israel, and you're winning the war and you're a step away from putting them down, you don't suddenly declare a ceasefire and open up negotiations to give them everything they want. It makes zero sense. And it violates every single rule of negotiation that Trump defended in The Art of the Deal, which is his book of on negotiation. What he claims is that when you have the upper hand, you have to press your advantage. That's Trump's recommendation for a negotiation. He's very tough. And what he's doing here now violates every single rule of his philosophy of negotiation. Why? Because he's not negotiating in favor of the West, and he's not negotiating in favor of Israel, and he's not negotiating in favor of the United States. He's negotiating in favor of jihadism. That's what he's pushing. That's what our model says. New York Post. Israelis slam proposed U.S.-Iran peace pact as a bad deal. Say it fails to address security concerns. Israel Hayom. Trump's Iran deal stirs Israeli anger. Wall Street Journal again. Israel is alarmed by Trump's deal with Iran. Critics say the deal eases pressure on Tehran too soon, while others say it shows the war was a mistake. Jewish Insider. Trump's Iran deal sidelines Israel as regional tensions shift into new phase. In Israel, the deal is being met with dismay across the board. Associated Press. Interim U.S.-Iran peace deal sparks anger among Israelis who lash out at Netanyahu. This is Le Monde, a French newspaper. After the U.S.-Iran deal, Israel revels in its military might, but finds itself at a strategic impasse. While Israel aimed to eliminate the existential threat posed by the Iranian regime, it was sidelined from the Memorandum of Understanding reached Sunday between the US and Iran. Meanwhile, its military now risks losing its freedom of action in Lebanon. El País says, that's a Spanish newspaper, says, the end, the end of the war sidelines Netanyahu. The pact does not achieve even one of the objectives of Israel. The prime minister ends up estranged with Trump and without any achievements that he can sell to his population 4 months away from the elections. Vance says the details of the US-Iran agreement still to be worked out amid skepticism from Republicans. Senate Republicans say there are many unanswered questions about the deal and question inclusion of funds for Iran. Oh yeah, they're going to give him money too. Going to give him money. Now, this is not from this moment. As you can see from the date, this is from May 23rd, 2026. But I'm including it here because it's a look back to a month ago when the rumors of what the Iran deal might look like were coming out. And what they were doing was compare what the Trump-Iran deal apparently was shaping up to be, which indeed that's how it became, and the Obama-Iran deal. Why is this an interesting comparison? Because Trump was very critical about Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. And everything suggests that what Trump is now going to sign with Iran is even worse than Obama's nuclear deal. Okay, so it's impossible for Trump to be a bigger phony than he is. The Guardian says Trump hails Iran deal that fixes nothing except a problem his war caused. Deal will leave things almost exactly as they were before. Axios scoop: CIA director doubts Iran's intentions on deal, sources say. Now, let me tell you a little secret. You don't have to be the director of the CIA to know that when the ayatollahs sign a deal, they have zero intention of keeping their promises. You just have to not be in a coma. It's quite enough that you are not dead for you to understand that when an Iranian ayatollah, whose ideology is jihad, who openly says, because they have state rituals where they chant death to America, death to the United States, they have state rituals where they promise to exterminate the population of Israel, right? You don't have to be the director of the CIA, much less a genius, to understand that these people will not keep their promises. They will keep trying to exterminate the Jews, and every advantage that you give them will be used against us. Anybody not dead knows this. How can anybody write a headline like this and not turn crimson with shame? CIA director doubts Iran's intentions. Give me a break. Here's what the Memorandum of Understanding appears to be establishing in its 14 points or whatever. I'm not going to give you the whole thing. I'm going to give you the highlights. Iran keeps its nuclear infrastructure. Why do we know this? Because what is being said is that we're going to wait 60 days before we start any negotiations on the nuclear deal. Just kicking the can down the road like they've been doing. And it's important to understand what this means. I forgot to put it here in the PowerPoint, but allow me to now show you our website, because I have an article that goes straight to the issue of the breakout time. So there's a concept called breakout time, and breakout time has to do with how long it takes Iran to get to sufficiently enriched uranium that they can make a nuclear bomb. Okay, that's the breakout time. And so if they tell you that breakout time is a year, what they're telling you is that Iran is about a year away from getting the uranium enriched to the point where it's ready for a nuclear bomb. Okay. And once you get to breakout time 0, in other words, you're ready, you got the enriched uranium you need, all that is left is to build the actual physical bomb. And of course, you might have been doing that in parallel. So once you get to breakout time of 0, you're basically ready to slap a bomb together and throw it at Israel. It could be a matter of weeks. Okay. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is that you can go to our website and read the following article. Let me now project it on the screen. You can read this article called Part 3, Is Trump for Real? Does Trump want an Iranian nuclear bomb dropped on Israel? Because in this article, we explain exactly what the breakout time is. And we show you, let me just show you the quote because it's amazing. Here's breakout time. So the U.S., it says here, the U.S. intelligence community, that's according to the Arms Control Association, the U.S. intelligence community has consistently noted since 2007 that Iran has the scientific, technical, and industrial capacity to produce nuclear weapons if it chooses to do so. The U.S. intelligence community has also assessed that if Iran were to make a decision to build nuclear weapons, it is more likely that it would seek to do so by means of undeclared secret facilities, a scenario sometimes called a sneak out. The term breakout time, as used by U.S. intelligence and national security analysts, answers the following question. Once Iran begins to build a nuclear bomb, how long until it has one? More precisely, how long would it take Iran, once it begins to produce enough highly enriched uranium, typically 25 kilograms enriched above 90%, for a single nuclear weapon? Okay, now notice what is not included in the breakout time calculation. As we were saying, designing the bomb, assembling a warhead, miniaturizing it for delivery, or fitting it into a missile. That's the physical bomb, right? So these steps are easier once the fissile core exists and can often be done in parallel, hidden from inspectors. Breakout time focuses on enrichment because once a state has the enriched uranium, it is almost impossible to stop them in time. Now, according to a British House of Commons briefing from October 2024, the very same month that Israel was dismantling Iran's air defenses, okay, according to the British House of Commons, quote, in 2022, several analysts considered Iran's breakout time to have reached 0, end of quote. Okay, so already in 2022, I'm not a judge of these kinds of statements. I can't tell you whether this is accurate or not. I'm not a nuclear inspector. I'm not a physicist. I'm not an expert on these things. But it was reported that people who were experts in 2022 already considered that Iran was ready. Breakout time, 0. Okay? So what does that mean in strategic terms? In strategic terms, it means that if you're estimating that Iran has already reached a breakout time of 0, forgive me, let me stop sharing so that I can do this. If Iran is already considered to have reached breakout time of 0, and you give them 2 months to, we'll just kick the can down the roads. We'll give them 2 months before we actually start talking about, dismantling their nuclear program. We're not in a rush. We're going to wait 2 months. If you do that, you're giving Iran 2 months in which to finish their nuclear bomb and drop it on Israel. So that is what Trump is doing here. Okay. 60 days. He is giving Iran 60 days at breakout time 0 to finish their nuclear bomb and drop it in Israel. If they dropped a bomb on us, make this video famous. Let these be my last words to warn the West. This is what Trump is doing. He is giving Iran time to finish the nuclear job. Second point on the memorandum, well, Iran keeps its enriched uranium for now. They're not even proposing to take it away, only to dilute it somewhat. Strengthens the first point. Third point, Iran gets sanctions relief and oil sales. Gets money it needs to finish the nuclear bomb. Iran reopens Hormuz. There is no public requirement to end its missile program. The missiles it's going to need to throw at Israel so that it overwhelms Israeli defenses and at least one nuclear missile gets through, right? Those missiles, no requirement to end those. And no requirement to end support for its terrorist proxies that it has around Israel, which are the fail-safe mechanism or the support mechanism in case it gets difficult to destroy Israel with nuclear weapons. Because one thing that does seem to be true is that Iranian incompetence is so far saving Israel. It seems they have trouble finishing the nuclear bomb, right? So it's not that it's impossible for them, probably, but they have faced technical difficulties and they haven't quite been able to do it, despite all the help they've been getting from Trump and earlier from Biden and earlier from Obama. As we were saying, deferred for the future, the nuclear program, the ballistic missiles, and the regional network of terror, right? That's supposedly going to be negotiated later, but no need to hurry. So Trump is giving the ayatollahs money, time, and oxygen to finish the nuclear bomb and drop it on us. On the Hezbollah front, the Memorandum of Understanding requires an end to Israeli military operations in Lebanon. It requires Israel to evacuate Lebanon. It does not require Hezbollah to disarm. I kept saying that they were going to do this. I wrote an entire article. This is a prediction that failed. I have to recognize this because I wrote an entire article predicting that once again they would propose that Israel leave Lebanon in exchange for the promise to disarm Hezbollah, because they've been doing this over and over again. And of course, Israel, every time Israel withdraws in Lebanon, Hezbollah is of course not disarmed because Hezbollah runs Lebanon. It's a Hezbollah-run state. So, but of course, the Israeli government, which is a servant of the U.S. president, always collaborates with this narrative nonsense about withdrawing from Lebanon in exchange for disarming Hezbollah. And I was sure, and I predicted that it would happen again, that once again they would say, okay, Israel has to get out of Lebanon in exchange for a promise of the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah, in exchange for the promise of Hezbollah to disarm Hezbollah. Okay, I thought they were going to do this again, and that prediction failed. But it failed in the right direction for my mom, right? Let's recognize that too, because what is happening is worse. They are telling Israel to get out of Lebanon without even promising this time that they're going to disarm Hezbollah. Of course, we knew they were not going to do that, but this time they're not even pretending. Like, they're out of the closet. They're sort of proudly telling the jihadis in a million symbolic, diplomatic, and almost explicit ways, sometimes explicit. They're telling the jihadis, look, nobody's got the back of Israel. You can just go ahead and attack them. That's what they're saying. That's what this memorandum of understanding is screaming to the jihadis everywhere. And they know how to read this language. So can the U.S. mainstream media, as you saw from all of those headlines, right? It is so obvious that describing it in any other way would be so ridiculous that they have to own it. They have to own it in their headlines that Trump has stabbed Israel in the back. There's just no other way to describe it. Does not require Iran to stop funding or arming Hezbollah. It's incredible. does not require Hezbollah to withdraw from southern Lebanon. Merely calls on Iran to restrain Hezbollah, whatever that means, which of course they won't do, right? But it's amazing that this is so Hezbollah, a genocidal army created to murder every Jew in Israel, created by the jihadis who openly say they want to repeat the final solution in Israel, the Iranian jihadis, right? Okay, as I said last time, imagine that there's a serial killer in your city, and he's killing all kinds of people. Everybody's terrified. And nobody knows who's next. And the mayor of the city comes out to say, don't worry, citizens of the city. We are going to restrain this psychopath. How would you feel if you were a citizen of that city? Oh, the solution is to what? To restrain? You're not going to arrest him? You're not going to kill him? Trump is saving Hezbollah, a genocidal jihadi army. And he is saving the Iranian ayatollahs, the genocidal godfathers of that army. But he's not leaving it there. He is floating the idea, Donald Trump is, that what they call Syria, which is another one of these magical words, Syria doesn't exist. Every time they say Syria in the media, what you should understand is that they're talking about ISIS. Okay? And now Trump is floating at the idea that ISIS, which is what now governs Syria, thanks to Trump, should deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we're going to trust the jihadis to deal with the jihadis. Let me tell you something. If the jihadis in Syria go to war with the jihadis in Lebanon, what's going to happen is that those jihadis are going to learn how to fight better. And no matter who wins, it's going to be jihadis in power, except that now they're going to be, war trained, ready for Israel. That's what Trump is proposing. This is Mohammad al-Jawlani. This is the guy who is running Syria now. Just a few years ago, the State Department, the U.S. State Department, was still putting out posters with a $10 million reward for al-Jawlani because he is a terrorist. He is the creator of Al-Qaeda in Syria, which is the ISIS branch in Syria. Okay? Al-Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, sent al-Jawlani to Syria to create the ISIS branch in Syria. This is the guy who was organizing his terrorists to slowly behead their victims on video. Proudly. Splattering all this atrocity on social media all over the world. That's al-Jawlani. That's the guy that is now running Syria. Why? Because Trump stopped Israel when Israel was advancing in Syria and could have joined the Rojava Kurds in the north of Syria, who are allies of the Jews, allies of the West. They're libertarians, they're Democrats. They emancipated Kurdish women, protected all minorities in Syria. No, Trump didn't want the Israelis to join with the Rojavans and liberate all of Syria. He stopped the Israelis and rushed to install Muhammad al-Jawlani as the new government of Syria. He installed ISIS as the new government of Syria. Look how happy he looks, how satisfied of what he is achieving. He's ecstatic. Al-Jawlani looks a little confused, like he's not really sure what just happened, but okay, the president wants me in power. I'm not going to complain. But what is happening, I'm not so sure. Now let's compare. Sorry, I forgot to put this in English. Now let's compare the predictions that I made. Get the video ready, please, Joel. And we will see whether my predictions are at all similar to what we see has been happening in the last couple of weeks. If you're ready, Yoel, you can play that video.
Estados Unidos no va a atacar a Irán, ni ahorita ni nunca, salvo que atacar a Irán sea malo para Israel.
The U.S. will never attack Iran unless attacking Iran is bad for Israel.
La predicción, y vamos a ver la confirmación dentro de muy poco, es que Donald Trump y los jefes gringos van a acomodar las cosas para que el desenlace de esta guerra nuevamente vulnere la seguridad de Israel y produzca un resurgimiento del poder yihadista en Oriente Medio. Trump no va a permitir que Israel derrote Hezbollah, no va a permitir que Israel libere el Líbano. Mi predicción es que cuando se asiente el polvo de la guerra contra Irán, las cosas van a ser peores para Israel. Lo que hace peligrar al Estado de Israel, fundamentalmente, es que muy poca gente entiende que los jefes gringos son los que están armando el proceso para destruir el Estado judío. Eso es lo que hace peligrar al Estado de Israel, que nadie entiende la jugada. Thank you, Yoel. So those were my predictions. Well, the last one was more of an explanation of what's going on. But those were my predictions, and I dare say, qualitatively, I was right. I was very clear before that I couldn't say exactly what they were going to do, because there's many different ways that you can hurt Israel and make jihadis stronger, right? There isn't just one solution to that problem. So I didn't know if they were going to give Iran to Turkey, which also wants to destroy Israel, and strengthen the Turkish axis that way, or if they were going to save the ayatollahs or something else. But now we know they decided to save the ayatollahs, and they are going to strengthen the ayatollahs again. So they've got 60 days to finish their nuclear weapon. They're going to get money. They don't have to get rid of their proxy terrorist forces. Israel has to get out of Lebanon. I mean, so the prediction was the U.S. will not go to war against Iran unless that is bad for Israel. The U.S. went to war against Iran, and the outcome of the war is very bad for Israel. I said Israel would not be allowed to destroy Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hezbollah is being rescued by Trump, as the Wall Street Journal correctly said. We've seen Trump order Netanyahu not to fire back when Israel is under fire simultaneously from Iran and from Hezbollah. This is all very clear. So now since the model is doing so well, let me now tell you a little bit about how it was put together, because it's not put together in a vacuum. We have historical evidence that we take seriously in order to infer what the possible intentions or probable intentions of the U.S. bosses are, right? What else are you going to do? This is the only way to do science. Science is you investigate the past in order to make your best attempt to predict the future. Because the past is the only thing that exists. Reality is the past. If you want to learn something about the universe, you look at the past. There's nothing else to look at. So we think it's very significant, very important, that before World War II, and this is perfectly well documented, even though you probably heard nothing about this in school, that before World War II, the bosses all over the West were eugenicists. eugenics was a very popular ideology among the power elites all over the Western civilization. And eugenics happens to be the movement that produced German Nazism. So if you're a eugenicist, you believe in this nonsense idea about the biological superiority of German stock, the Nordic Aryan race, that nonsense, the Germanic race. If you believe that, you're a eugenicist. This is what the eugenicists believed. Yes, they also believed in this is what people always remember when they remember anything. They remember that they were trying to control people's reproduction, right? Oh, eugenics is about controlling people's reproduction. Yeah, but the people who were trying to control people's reproduction also believed that Germans were biological superior. Both things were true about the eugenics movement. They were trying to control the reproduction of non-Germanic stock. And they considered that the lower classes all over the West did not have a sufficient number of German genes. Now, why did they think that? Because again, you need a little history to know this, and it's explained in the article. When I have a whole book on this, if you want to get deeper, and it's also linked from the article. If I lost my train of thought, I was telling you eugenics. Oh yeah, so the major sponsors of the eugenics movement, which believed that these two things simultaneously, they believed that Germanic stock was superior and that they should control the reproduction of the lower classes because they're not Germanic. They believe that because when you go back to the fall of the Roman Empire, the Latin Roman Empire, okay, the Western Roman Empire, what you find is that as the political structure of the empire was sort of falling apart a little bit towards the end of the 5th century, it was Germanic military aristocracies that took over the Western provinces of the Roman Empire. Okay, so the entire European nobility descends from these Germanic military aristocracies. They're Lombards and Ostrogoths in northern Italy, Visigoths in the Iberian Peninsula. Goth means German. Franks, another Germanic tribe in France, the Low Countries, and Germany. Got Angles and Saxons that fuse together, become Anglo-Saxons in the British Isles, and then also Danes and Normans into the mix. And in the north, you have the Scandinavians. These are all Germanic, right? So, and they're now ruling over the poor devils that the Romans had ruled before. Okay, so the lower classes are not considered Germanic. The middle and lower classes are not considered Germanic. It's the aristocracy that has this historical reason, and therefore also this mythology about their Germanic origin. All right. So all over the West, the idea of Germanic superiority was very popular with the aristocracies all over the West. Okay. And it's perfectly well documented that this was going on. The eugenics movement was the most important social and political movement in the West in the first half of the 20th century. The fact that this point was not made in your school education does not mean this is not perfectly well documented. It just means that your education had a very important bias to whitewash the eugenics movement, to kind of erase it from history. And part of the reason is that when you go to school and you learn about World War II, you are learning Winston Churchill's interpretation of the war, because Churchill wrote a 6-volume history of the war immediately after it finished. And they gave him the Nobel Prize for it. And that long history of the war became sort of the platform for every historian that followed, every mainstream historian that followed. And so when you learn about the history of World War II in school, you're learning Churchill's paradigm. And Churchill, in The Gathering Storm, the 1st volume, where he's explaining the alleged causes of the war, he not once mentions the word eugenics, not once. Not once. Okay? So the movement that produced German Nazism in the main paradigm, historiographical paradigm for understanding World War II, which is what everybody learns in school, okay? The cause of German Nazism is not discussed. How about that? But we take it very seriously. We take it very seriously that the people running the United States and the people running Britain and the people running the other European countries before World War II were eugenicists. They were very fond of the argument of German biological superiority, and it was money from the big eugenicists in the United States, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, the Harrimans, Thomas Watson from IBM, etc. These fortunes were financing the eugenics movement in Germany and turned it into German Nazism. All perfectly well documented. The most important book in this domain is Edwin Black's War Against the Weak, which is also referenced in the article. You can go read it. It's minute, it's exquisite documentation, and nobody disputes that this happened. Now, after the war, something else that nobody disputes is that the CIA, at least not since 1988, when historian Christopher Simpson wrote his book Blowback, we discuss it in this article. That book, Blowback, is a documentation based on an enormous amount of material that Simpson was able to liberate from the U.S. government thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, okay, the U.S. transparency law. And what he documented was that the CIA, the U.S. intelligence service, the U.S. clandestine service, was created after World War II by absorbing Fremde Heer Oost, which was the Nazi intelligence service in Eastern Europe, run by General Reinhard Gehlen. So what they did after the war, what the U.S. government did after the war is it recruited Reinhard Gehlen, whom they had captured, to recreate that intelligence system for the U.S., and that became the CIA. We're talking about tens of thousands of German Nazis and German Nazi collaborators, at least. And so this, what does this tell you? Well, this tells you that the ideology they had before the war, eugenics, is still the ideology they have after the war. And why would you think anything else? It's the same people. It's the same people. The Rockefellers were running the United States and putting people in the White House, including Roosevelt, before the war, and they were doing it after the war. The Rockefellers were heavily involved in the creation of the CIA through themselves personally involved. So Nelson and David Rockefeller were personally involved in this, as they had been during the war, because they had intelligence roles during the war in the U.S. government, right? They were doing it before the war. They were doing it after the war. It's the same people, the same eugenicists. Rockefeller was funding eugenics to the hilt before the war, okay? So there's no reason to think that anything changed. They're absorbing the Nazis. It's the same guys, right? So what do you expect the post-war foreign policy of the United States is going to be? Well, of course it's going to be pro-Nazi. It's the Nazis making the foreign policy. The CIA is the organ that cooks U.S. foreign policy. So of course they're going to try to build a geopolitical chessboard that produces a new genocide of the Jews. Of course, naturally, this is what Nazis do. And the structure is very similar. So in World War II, they were getting the Germans to kill the Jews because the grammar is not very good for them to do it directly. That would offend too many people in the United States. Maybe in a few years this will no longer be true if present tense continue, but present trends continue. Forgive me. But for now, still, it's dicey for the president of the United States to directly attack the state of Israel and exterminate its population. Too many U.S. citizens would not like that, right? So they need a third party to do it. In World War II, they got the Germans to do it after turning them into Nazis with U.S. money. And in the post-war, they have been creating the jihadi forces that are now going to come kill us here in Israel. So they created the Afghan jihadis. That was a creation of the CIA and the Pakistani ISI. They created the ISIS jihadis. We have a whole article documenting that on our site, and there's nothing controversial about this. This was discovered in this was discussed in the mainstream press, in the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and everywhere else, that the U.S. created ISIS in the prison system that they created in Iraq. It was quite deliberate. And the CIA created the ayatollah, the jihadi ayatollahs as well. It is now well documented, and we have a whole series on management of reality on the, it's called the Iran-Contra series. We explain how Jimmy Carter got rid of the Shah of Iran and installed Ayatollah Khomeini in power. Ayatollah Khomeini had a relationship with the CIA since 1963, we now know, because certain top secret documents became public. They became public in 2016. So now we know that they were preparing Ayatollah Khomeini from the beginning to become the replacement of the Shah, and Carter made sure that he got rid of the Shah, and also made sure that the Iranian military would allow Khomeini to take power. And then what happened? Then Ronald Reagan, in what is called the Iran-Contra scandal, began sending, immediately after he was elected, on promises to confront Iran, right? The first thing he did, he started organizing secret weapons transfers to Ayatollah Khomeini. When they caught him red-handed, this was called the Iran-Contra scandal. It still hasn't been explained, right? So Reagan said, when they caught him, he said, oh, we were trying to, it was a ransom payment to free Hezbollah-held hostages in Lebanon. Nonsense. We now know that the arms transfers began in 1981. And there were no Hezbollah-held hostages in 1981. The first one was taken in 1982. So the decision to start sending secret weapons to Iran had absolutely nothing to do with hostages. And it is perfectly consistent with Carter installing Khomeini in Iran, and perfectly consistent with the other thing that Carter did, which was to create the Afghan Mujahideen. And it's consistent with the later creation of ISIS. The US government has been creating jihadi forces hell-bent on destroying, in genocide, the state of Israel, which is exactly what you would expect a clandestine service, the CIA, created out of Nazis to do. It's exactly what you would expect. Nothing strange about it. This is how we built the model, okay? Now, this would lead us to expect that World War II, the history of World War II, needs to be re-examined. And of course, I've been doing that in my series of books, but those are in Spanish. If you don't read Spanish, you can read some articles on management of reality that are repurposing that material for an English-speaking audience. For example, this one, which is called None Ever Called Neville Chamberlain a Nazi. Why not? It's a very important question, because Neville Chamberlain was turned into the symbol of the appeasement, what they call the appeasement of Adolf Hitler, right? So what you learned in school, I learned it too, is that during the 1930s, the Western powers were supposedly appeasing Hitler. In other words, they were trying to get him to calm down by giving him everything he wanted. So the idea was, if we give Hitler, every time Hitler had a tantrum, they would give him what, he had a tantrum about rearming Germany. Okay, let him rearm Germany. He had a tantrum about occupying the Rhineland. All right, let him reoccupy the Rhineland. He had a tantrum because he wanted Czechoslovakia. All right, forgive me, Austria first. All right, let him swallow Austria. Now he wants to swallow Czechoslovakia. All right, let him swallow Czechoslovakia. And every time the argument goes, what the Western leaders were supposedly doing was trying to get Hitler to calm down, but they were idiots. They couldn't understand that Hitler was insatiable, that he was going to launch a war anyway, that everything they were giving him was just strengthening his position to launch that war. They were idiots, and they were cowards. They didn't dare oppose Hitler. This is the interpretation. And the poster boy for this interpretation is Neville Chamberlain, because Neville Chamberlain very famously sold out Czechoslovakia, right? What Trump is now doing with Israel. He sold out Czechoslovakia. He went to Hitler, negotiated for the surrender of Czechoslovakia without the Czechoslovaks even being involved in the negotiation, right? And he allowed Hitler to swallow it. And he saved Hitler, as I said before, because Hitler would have been destroyed if he had chosen to fight the Czechoslovaks, right? Well, this is what happened again, right? We've had more than one Munich agreement with Israel. The first big one was the surrender of the Sinai, which Jimmy Carter negotiated. Again, Jimmy Carter negotiated on behalf of the Egyptians, right? So he got Menachem Begin to return the Sinai after the 1967 war, right? So in the 1967 war, these Arab countries around Israel try to exterminate the Israeli Jews. The Jews win the war in 6 days. And one of the things they win is the Sinai, the entire Sinai. Well, Jimmy Carter got Prime Minister Menachem Begin to return to Egypt the Sinai in exchange for just a piece of paper, a promise of peace, which of course Egypt has not kept. Egypt is at war with Israel, right? So that was a kind of a Munich agreement, right? Another one was this one, the one you have on the screen, the 1993 Oslo Accord handshake, which began the process to bring PLO Fatah into Israel. That's Yasser Arafat there, the leader of the PLO. This was a policy that all the US presidents have supported. And what it means is that they're introducing the continuation of the German Nazi final solution into Israel. Because PLO Fatah, the thing they introduced, Yasser Arafat's outfit, which is now in Judea and Samaria, and we call the Palestinian Authority, that thing is descended from Haj Amin al-Husseini's Arab Higher Committee. And Haj Amin al-Husseini, the founder, he's in the photo right there. You're looking at him. He's the guy with the funny hat. He is the founding father of the Arab Palestinian movement. And during World War II, he was a top Nazi playing a leading role in the extermination of the European Jewish population. That's right. The Arab Palestinian movement worked hand in hand with the German Nazis to exterminate the European Jews. And this is something that was not said to the Israeli Jews when the Oslo Accords were negotiated to bring the spawn of the exterminator Husseini into the Jewish state. They were not told this. They were also not told that PLO Fatah is the creator of the or the co-creator, because of course the US government had a big hand in this, but PLO Fatah is the co-creator of jihadi Iran. PLO Fatah had a state within a state in Lebanon in the 1970s, and it was there that PLO Fatah armed and trained Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas, the same guerrillas that fought the Iranian Islamic Revolution and created jihadi Iran in 1979. There's Ayatollah Khomeini with Yasser Arafat in Tehran celebrating the triumph of the Islamic Revolution. As soon as they won, Khomeini sent an airplane to go pick up Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas and other PLO cronies. And from Tehran, they announced together that they were going to destroy the state of Israel. What do you think? Is this love? This is Ayatollah Khomeini and Yasser Arafat. This is the most amazing thing from the point of view of the management of reality, which is the fundamental thing we are investigating here. In 1979, when the Islamic Revolution succeeded, it was explained on the front page of the New York Times and other papers that PLO Fatah had made that revolution, that they had trained Ayatollah Khomeini's forces. And it was explained that PLO Fatah bosses had gone to Tehran to help Ayatollah Khomeini set up his terror institutions, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Savama, the internal police, secret police that oppresses the Iranians. This was all reported in the major newspapers on the front page. PLO Fatah made jihadi Iran. And just like 4 years later, they stopped talking about this. Just like earlier, they had stopped talking about Husseini, who had been world famous, right? world famous architect of the Holocaust. At the end of the war, British parliamentarians in the House of Commons were loudly protesting that Husseini was not being tried and executed in the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal because everybody knew who he was and what he had done. Everybody knew, right? But around 1968, which is when PLO Fatah was swallowing the PLO, they stopped talking about him. Not one word now. No more. Nobody mentioned Husseini again. Same thing happened with the relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran. A few years after the Iranian Revolution, the entire media and academia, the entire meaning-making system stopped talking about the relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran. So by the time we get to the Oslo Accord signature, nobody remembered either of these things. And either one alone is enough to make you understand that the Oslo process that brought PLO Fatah, what we call the Palestinian Authority, into Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, which, by the way, is militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state, right? All of that makes it obvious that the Oslo process is an attack on Israel. You don't have to be a genius. You just have to know history. But history is precisely what was not mentioned when this accord was negotiated. Okay. So that's some of the important evidence that we use to build the model, right? The model says the US presidents, the US bosses, whoever they are, whoever pulls the strings of the US president, right? Rockefellers and other big magnates. Those guys want to kill all the Jews. And they're using the jihadis to do it, just like the German Nazis also used jihadis during World War II. It's all the same model. It's just it worked before, nobody understands it. So why would you change it? If it worked once before and nobody knows what happened, nobody's learning it in school, you can just repeat the same thing again. People don't have an immune system against it because they don't know any history, right? So just repeat it. And that's what they're doing. So just briefly before we go, what we've been publishing here on Management of Reality is a series called The Geopolitical Theorem, where we explain the war. We explain Trump's war in Iran. In this first article, when the war started, everybody started saying that we had to be wrong because if we weren't wrong, Trump wouldn't have attacked Iran. What we did is we explained that this was not the first time that the U.S. bosses had attacked jihadis. And these are the jihadis that they themselves created. And every time they attack them, the jihadism gets stronger, like it did in Afghanistan, and like ISIS did in Syria, and like Iran is now going to become. It's going to get stronger. Every time they attack them, they get stronger because that's what U.S. policy is. It's to make jihadism stronger so that it will destroy Israel. This is what they're doing. Of course, they say things. They don't say that, although, of course, now they're starting to say it. They're coming out of the closet. They're getting closer and closer to total frankness. And so what I did in part one is I replied to my critics who said that this attack meant that my model had failed. In part two, I point out, I lay out a theorem based on one dramatic historical fact, which is that in 1983, Hezbollah killed in a terrorist attack more U.S. citizens than anybody had ever killed in a terrorist attack. 258 U.S. citizens killed in Lebanon, most of them boys, Marines, who were killed in their barracks while they slept. Nobody had ever killed that many U.S. citizens in a terrorist attack. And Ronald Reagan's reaction to this, remember, this is 1983. The secret Iran-Contra weapons were already flowing to the Iranians. And a Hezbollah terror attack in Lebanon means an Iranian terror attack in Lebanon, okay? So what did Reagan do? Reagan cut and run. He evacuated U.S. forces from Lebanon, leaving it to Hezbollah. He didn't reply to the terrorist attack, and he kept sending secret weapons to the authors of the attack, the Iranian ayatollahs. That, under the mainstream model that says that U.S. presidents are enemies of jihadism and the best friends of Israel, is not improbable. It is impossible. Impossible. Therefore, I have a theorem to demonstrate to you on the basis of historical evidence that nobody disputes that the U.S. bosses are pro-jihad and anti-Israel. It's not a question anymore. I have a theorem. So that's what I lay out in part 2. In part 3, I pretend that I don't have a theorem. I allow the mainstream model to limp along, and I examine 50 years of Middle East policy to see whether the mainstream model can explain anything. And what I show you is that it explains nothing. The only recourse that my theoretical rivals have is to say that it was 50 years of incompetence, that even though the U.S. means to defend Israel, somehow they always end up strengthening the jihadis that want to destroy Israel. But that's not a very reasonable model, because you're talking about the most powerful people in all of history. How can they be so stupid and so powerful at the same time? It's not a very plausible model. And then in part 4, I start explaining the actual epic fury war that Trump waged against Iran. So in part 4, I explain the buildup. I explain how Trump ended up trapped in his own narrative, entrapped by the political grammar of the jihadis who couldn't sign. And then he was forced to attack because it would have been too ridiculous otherwise. He wouldn't have been able to keep his narrative together otherwise. But notice how concertedly the mainstream mass media cooperated to protect Trump from the fact that he had abandoned ordinary Iranians. Nobody's talking about this now. The ayatollahs were massacring the Iranian population. Okay? The whole reason to mobilize against Iran initially was that they were killing tens of thousands of Iranians. Well, they've been completely abandoned. Nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about this. Trump created a negotiation process to save the ayatollahs, who will now stay in power and will have the opportunity to go on massacring the Iranians that Trump was supposedly going to defend. Nobody is discussing this. Everybody is protecting Trump. You think the media is against Trump? Think again. Think again. And finally, part 5 of the ones published explains the result on the Hezbollah front. We already discussed it at the top. I go in deeper. I explain the history of how Israel has always been restrained in Lebanon. They never let Israel defeat Hezbollah. I explained that there. It's been perfectly consistent. And now we're about to publish part 6. It'll be coming out next week. We explain in more detail what we've been discussing. And of course, there will be more information next week about how the accord with Iran is shaping up. Now, before we go, I want to remind everybody that we have sessions of questions and answers after my English podcast. They're open to all of my paid subscribers on Substack. If you would like to become a paid subscriber, just go to Substack. You can do it on any one of my articles or on the main page. And you will see the links to Substack in the description. You become a paid subscriber, you will be able to see the link to the Zoom, and you will be able to join us on our Q&As. I'm going to right now, I'm going to publish on management of reality. Let me just stop sharing. Here we go. I'm going to publish on management of reality the invitation to today's Q&A, so that it is published on the page. So you can just go to the page. You'll see it on the top left hand corner. If you become a paid subscriber, you will see the link on that posting, and you can come join us in another 5 minutes when we start the Q&A. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, and most of all, don't forget to share, because all of Western civilization is in grave danger. We've seen what's happening in Europe. That's going to be the topic, partly the topic of our podcast next week. What appears to be the beginning of a civil war in Northern Ireland, and all kinds of other mayhem that is going on in Europe, because Europeans are finally beginning to defend themselves from the jihadi onslaught in Europe. So we're going to be talking about that. We will have another Q&A next week. Again, if you want to join that, become a paid subscriber on Substack. And now I will see you soon. I will see you next week on our next English language podcast.